In this lesson, we're going to look at what happens when you multiply and divide negative numbers. Now, the first thing we'll need to remember before we get into this is that when you multiply, you get the same answer if you swap the numbers around. So 3 times 2 is 6, but so is 2 times 3. It doesn't matter which way around the two numbers are, you'll get the same answer. And there's actually a name for this in maths. It's known as the commutative law. You don't need to remember the name of it, just the fact that you can do it. Now with the next one, we've got 3 times 2 equals 6, and I can actually play around with that to make a division equation instead. See, here we start with 3 times 2 and end with 6. If I start with 6 and divide by either one of these numbers, I get the other one as the answer. So if I go 6 divided by 3, then the answer is 2. If I went 6 divided by 2, then the answer is 3. Now you may well have already known that, but that will be useful as well in this lesson. Okay, getting into this now, when we multiply or divide, if there's one negative, it's going to stay in the answer, but if there's two negatives, they're going to cancel each other out. You might remember that from last year. And so if we've got negative 3 times 2, there's only one negative number here. That means the answer is going to be negative. So I just do 3 times 2 like normal and get 6. Because there's one negative, my answer is negative. This one also only has one negative. It's just on the other number. Doesn't matter which number it's on. If there's only one negative, the answer is a negative. But this one down here, they're both negative. Negative 3 times negative 2, and because they're both negative, my answer becomes a positive instead. Notice every time it was always 3 times 2, 3 times 2. You always get 6. You just got to decide, is it positive or is it negative 6? Now we're just going to have a quick look at one way we can show sort of why this works, and we're going to do it using this table here. This is just a multiplication table, like a times table, except it's got negatives as well. I'm going to start off with the zeros and all the positives here, so I'm going to put them all in. So 0 times 0 is nothing, 0 times 1 is nothing, etc., because 0 times anything is nothing, and so they're all zeros as well for the same reason. But then, you know, this one's 1 times 1, so that's why it's 1. This one down here is 3 times 2, so that's why I put a 6 there. So I've just put all the positive ones in to start with. Now with the next step, we'll just be using this number line here, and what I'll be doing is doing 3 times by negative 2. And so that means it's 3 lots of negative 2. So when I go, this is one lot of negative 2 there. Another lot of negative 2 is going to bring us all the way over to here. And our third lot will bring us all the way over to here. So by using that number line, I can show that the answer to this is going to be negative 6. And so if I'm timesing a positive by a negative, then that means that I will get my negative answer there. And so I can put all those inside my grid. Notice it's just the same as, so it's negative 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. It's just the same idea as down here, except these guys are all going to have negative answers because these are negatives and these are positives. Now with the next one, we'll start with a negative, but remember when it's times, it doesn't make a difference which way around we're doing it. So I'm just going to think of this as 2 lots of negative 3. And so that's one lot of negative 3 there. That's a second lot of negative 3. I got to negative 6. So once again, just showing that when you do negative 3 times 2, or in this case I just did 2 lots of negative 3, you do indeed get negative 6 as the answer. So now I can go and fill in these ones here, because if I go negative 3 times 2, I get negative 6. If I times any of these negative numbers here by these positives, I get negative 6. So I get negative answers. Now, showing a negative times a negative on a number line isn't quite as straightforward, and that's why I've used this table here. Notice there's only one place to fill in, and what you can notice about the table is it's symmetrical. If you look at this block down here, it's exactly the same as that block up there. Makes sense that this block down here would be exactly the same block up here. So this is just another way of showing that when you do these negatives times negatives, you end up with positive numbers there. Now we've only done multiplying so far, but we can show it works with divide as well, because we've just got to remember that all the multiplication questions can be turned into divide questions. And so 3 times negative 2 equals negative 6. And so if I start with negative 6 and divide by either of those two numbers, I'll get the other one as the answer. So that means negative 6 divided by positive 3 is negative 2. I'm just getting that straight from this question here, and that means that I've shown that, okay, a negative divided by a positive is again a negative. And if I start with negative 6 and I divide by negative 2, then because here's negative 6 divided by the negative 2. The other one was a positive 3, so negative 6 divided by negative 2 is positive 3. And we should expect rules that work with multiplication to work with division as well anyway, because they're sort of like just going in opposite directions to each other. The rules tend to be the same. Adding and subtracting usually follow the same rules. Multiplication and division tend to follow the same rules as well. So let's move on to some examples. We're going to go 4 times negative 3. Remember, those brackets there are something the textbook will put in, and when you write down the question, you can just ignore the brackets as long as they're only around a single number like that, even if it's a negative number. And so 4 times 3 is 12. There is one negative there. That means that the answer is going to be negative 12. And that's it. Just write down the question equals the answer. And the next one, we're going to work out negative 24 divided by negative 6. Let's write down the question. Notice that there is two negatives here. There's a negative there and a negative there. That means they cancel each other out. And so 24 divided by 6 is just going to be positive 4. Now in this next one, we've got three numbers we're multiplying or dividing. And we're not going to need to worry about Bodmas here, because in Bodmas, division and multiplication, it can go in either order, and there's only division and multiplication here. And so I'm going to write down the question, and again, I'm not going to put down these brackets because they're only around a single number. And so I write down the question, and the way we do these is just go left to right. And so I'm just going to work out negative 8 divided by 2. And then I'm going to put the answer underneath, because remember, we only go across if we're just writing down the final answer, and we're not going to get the final answer straight away in this time, so we're going to go down the page. And so negative 8 divided by 2, 8 divided by 2 is 4, and there's a single negative. I'm not worried about this negative at the moment because I'm ignoring this whole thing. I'm only focusing on working out negative 8 divided by 2. So that's negative 4. So I write that down, and I just copy the times by negative 3 down as well, because I haven't used that yet. And now I can work out negative 4 times by negative 3, and so 4 times 3 is 12, and there's two negatives, they'll cancel out, and I'm left with just positive 12. Now for example 4, we need to find the missing number in 5 times something equals negative 25. And so it's usually not too difficult to work out what do you have to times by 5 to get 25. The tricky part is just working out, hey, is it positive or negative? And since my answer here is negative, and there was no negative over here, that means the negative must be in there. So 5 times 5 gets 25, and that must be negative 5. So we're just going to write down the question and put the answer in. Remember to actually draw the box so you know the answer that you're checking. Let's try a couple of practice questions now. Remember to pause the video. And there are the solutions, focusing especially as well on the working that should be shown here, going down the page. Now going through those, we start off with negative 15 divided by negative 3. The first thing I did was write it down, but without the brackets, because the brackets are only around single numbers here, negative numbers. And then I did 15 divided by 3 is 5. There is two negatives, and so that means they cancel each other out. And so 15 divided by 3, that's just going to be 5 with no negative. In the second one, we've got three numbers to deal with here, so I wrote down the question, and I didn't put the brackets in because they're, again, just around single numbers there. And first thing I focused on was negative 10 divided by negative 5. This times by negative 3, I'll get to that on the next one. So negative 10 divided by negative 5, 10 divided by 5 is 2, and there is two negatives, and so that means they cancel each other out. And so I will just left with 2 there. And this times by negative 3, I just copied that down because I haven't used it yet. And then 2 times by negative 3, that is negative 6, because 2 times 3 is 6, and there's a single negative. So there's my answer. And in the last one, I defined the missing number in negative 40 divided by something equals 5. And so I just did 40. What do I have to divide 40 by to get 5? That was the first thing to work out, and I worked out that was 8. Just using your times tables, or hopefully you can just do that in your head. And then the trick was, though, that there's no negative in the answer, but there is one in the question here, which means we have to put another one in there so it cancels out that one there, so there won't be one in the answer. So here's some more practice questions for if you need to have another go at any of them. Remember to pause the video. And there's the solution. Hopefully you got them right this time. If not, remember to seek some extra help. And that's the end of the lesson.